Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. The Kingsmarch map device is something that lots of players have experimented with, but not really in any super organized way. I aim to change that. What I've been trying to do, and I've already started doing this on a small scale at the moment, is doing some community crowdsourcing of drop rates of various divination cards when people run the Kingsmarch map device. The key thing we're looking for is any information that might help us work out the best way that you can potentially use this map device. One thing we're currently in the process of testing is just how rarity on maps affects it. So I've got a whole bunch of Maven's chisels of procurement. These are pretty cheap this league, no one really seems to want them. And I've used them to roll up a bunch of maps that are scoured, but that have 60% rarity on them. What I'm going to be doing next is running several blocks of 100 Alleyways maps, each of which is going to be 60 rarity, 0 quantity, and see how this varies from the drops that you would get when you run a 0 rarity, 0 quantity Alleyways map. Is there any benefit to having more rarity on the maps, or is it something that's not relevant? There are two main reasons I'm doing this. The first reason I'm doing this is that discovering things like this can just simply be fun. Trying to work out exactly what grinding gear games have done in order to make the map device either feel worth using, or potentially the things they might have done to try to make it feel worth using that haven't worked. And then secondly, there's also the question of, is there a clear best way to use the map device? For example, I believe it's now pretty much solved that the best way to use Tujin is to send off shipments of 50 million every time that you can, at least in Trade League. And there's been a bunch of research into the exact formula of the way in which currency gets returned to you. And it seems like the game allocates loot according to the cube root of how rare each particular currency item normally is. Now that might sound like it's a bad thing because cube root is a function that decreases values, but the key thing is this means that some of the overwhelmingly common currencies, like alteration orbs, transmutation orbs and the like, they have their drop rates absolutely crushed by this, but at the same time some of the super rare outcomes like divine orbs, sacred orbs, and the one we all care about the most, mirror shards, they end up having their comparative drop rate increase because they're not affected as much by the cube root function. Mirror shards can't normally drop, they're a bit of an oddball in that regard, but there's some pretty old but compelling evidence still that alteration orbs are 160,000 times as common as mirrors are, which would imply that alteration orbs would be 8,000 times as common as a mirror shard. And if that's the case, and if the cube root formula is correct, then with a 50 million all grain and dust shipment, what you should see is 20 alteration orbs for every one mirror shard. 20, of course, being the cube root of 8,000. This seems to be pretty much in line with reports from all over the web, so I think this is either the correct formula, or it's close enough to the correct formula that it works for our purposes. Anyways, I'm curious if anything similar is going on with the map device. In order to test this, I've chosen a specific map, and that map is Alleyways. We're choosing it for its divination cards, not because anyone really wants these divination cards, but because their drop rates are well documented. Whole bunch of information's been worked out on exactly how drop rates of divination cards work, and that's a separate video. I'll put a link to it in the last 20 seconds of this vid in the bottom left corner of the screen. The short version though is that the gold cost that it costs to transact on Faustus's currency exchange is very, very closely related to the rarity of the card. Based on this, we know Assassin's Favor is very common. In fact, 23 Assassin's Favor will drop for every 13 the Trial. The Trial is also quite common. But then the Life Thief and the Long Watch are both very rare cards, close in rarity, but slightly more common than the divination card Brother's Gift, which can be turned in for 5 divine orbs. The benefit to doing this on Alleyways is that we have widely divergent rarities on these divination cards, and we also have 2 that are quite common and that have different drop rates to each other, so that Now, this is where the community effort comes in. Something I would really like to do is get some help from people, and I'm running this out of my Discord, which I'll put a link to. So this is Editing Gog here. I've given a bit more thought as to how I want to handle a Discord link. I don't want to put a link in the video description, and I don't want to put one in the comments either. That's because of the amount of bot spam that is infesting any Discord server that has permanent links. I want to try and keep that out of mine. And so what I'm going to do is something that is quite annoying if you're watching this on mobile, but I'm going to burn a link in to the Discord on screen. You won't be able to click this. The only way you'll be able to get it is to transcribe it. While that's a nuisance for you, it's a bigger nuisance for bots because they aren't designed to OCR random videos in order to look for Discord links and then find them that way. So that's not going to end up helping bots out, and it's going to keep the place clean of that sort of garbage. This is going to be where we're going to be running this out of. And the goal is that we're going to try and get people to commit to doing 100 maps. To give you a bit of a sense of the amount of effort that's involved in 100 maps, if you have 12 mappers that are all level 9, and you'll need a couple of reserves because some of them will die, it's going to take your mappers something like 10 hours to do 100 maps, and additionally, you'll need to come back a few times. On top of that, you're going to need somewhere of the order 350,000 gold in order to get them to run that number of maps for you. So keep that in mind. If farming 350,000 gold for an experiment is too much of an ordeal, then I don't recommend being part of this. Additionally, if farming 100 Alleyways maps feels like it's unreasonable, I'd also say give it a miss. But if you're the sort of player who can be pretty efficient when you want to be, but you've got no real goals left in the league, I reckon this is definitely worth playing around with. What we want to do is test a whole bunch of different configurations. I mentioned that I'm using Maven chisels of procurement at the moment on scoured maps. We're also going to want to do the same thing on different tiers. We've done a whole bunch of testing on tier 15 alleyways. I'm using tier 16s now because I have run out of tier 15s, and I've run out of tier 14 maps that you might be able to harbinger orb up to them as well. But there's going to be a whole bunch of other tests as well, including a bunch that you can do if you don't have any level 10 mappers. If you're interested in being a part of it, I would recommend jumping into the Discord and having a discussion there, and then taking up blocks of 100 if you feel that you can definitely commit to doing them. To start with, we're only going to be tracking the divination card drops, but over time we might change that, and then we might start doing testing where we start tracking the relative rarity of various currencies. Some of them will be common, like transmutations, some of them will be uncommon, like regals, and some will be rare, like exalted orbs, and some will be staggeringly rare, like sacred orbs and Hinekora's locks and mirrors. All of this is stuff we're going to do over the course of the project. My goal is to try and reverse engineer the formulas that Grinding Gear Games have used in order to decide what loot to award, and once that's happened, try and work out the best possible way that we can take advantage of that knowledge. I'm going to leave it there. May your Val orbs have interesting results.